Let's approach this carefully, without bitterness or accusation, because the goal here isn't to judge women, it's to protect your clarity. And clarity always comes from observing patterns, not emotions. A woman using a man for money rarely announces it. She doesn't demand it outright. She blends it into affection, attention, and need. And that's why many men don't notice until they feel drained. Female psychology teaches us something important. People reveal intentions through consistency, not words. So if you want to understand whether money is the foundation of her interest, you watch what happens when money is not present. The first sign shows up in how the relationship began. If your financial stability was highlighted early, if conversations quickly turned toward lifestyle, comfort, or provision, and emotional connection lagged behind material discussion, that imbalance matters. Attraction usually starts with curiosity and presence. When money becomes central too quickly, it can signal misplaced motivation. Another pattern appears in how she responds to boundaries. When you say no, gently, calmly, without explanation, does her energy change? Does warmth cool? Does interest dip? Female psychology is very sensitive to perceived loss of benefit. If affection fades when access tightens, you're not seeing disappointment. You're seeing expectation. Expectation is not intimacy. Pay attention to how often money becomes the solution. If every problem circles back to something you can pay for, if emotional discomfort is relieved through spending, and effort rarely flows in the opposite direction, the dynamic becomes transactional. Healthy relationships don't outsource emotional regulation to finances. Another subtle indicator is how she reacts to your stress. When you're under pressure and less generous, does she become distant, impatient, or critical? Does support feel conditional? Genuine care doesn't disappear when resources fluctuate. Interest rooted in benefit often does. Female psychology doesn't say all women seek security. It says security alone cannot sustain attraction. Notice whether appreciation is tied to generosity. When you give, she's affectionate. When you slow down, she withdraws. When you provide, you're praised. When you pause, you're questioned. That pattern quietly teaches you to buy peace. And peace that must be purchased isn't peace. Another important area is initiative. Does she contribute emotionally, practically, or energetically? Or does she mostly receive? Balance doesn't require equal spending. It requires mutual investment. When one person always pays and the other rarely offers, the relationship becomes asymmetrical. And asymmetry breeds resentment. Watch how she speaks about money. Not the amount, the meaning. If money represents safety, value, and identity for her, she may unconsciously tie attraction to provision. That doesn't make her malicious, but it does make the relationship fragile. Because when money defines worth, love becomes conditional. Female psychology also highlights entitlement. Entitlement doesn't always look demanding. Sometimes it looks assumed. She expects certain experiences. She expects a certain standard. She expects you to adjust. And when those expectations aren't met, disappointment replaces curiosity. That shift matters. Another revealing moment is when you stop overgiving. Not testing, not withdrawing in anger, just returning to balance. If she leans in emotionally, if connection deepens, if interest remains, that's a good sign. But if she disengages, becomes distant, or increases pressure, you've learned something important. Interest tied to money weakens when money stops flowing. Female psychology is very clear here. What someone values most will show up under constraint. The goal is not to accuse or confront, it's to observe calmly. Men often get trapped because they confuse generosity with obligation. Generosity is a choice. Obligation is a trap. When you feel anxious about reducing spending, that anxiety is information. It means the relationship may be maintained by provision, not connection. Here's the grounding truth. A woman who values you for who you are does not panic when money becomes secondary. She adapts, she supports, she stays emotionally engaged. A woman who values what you provide struggles when the provision slows. And that struggle isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet disappointment, subtle distance, reduced warmth. That's why clarity matters. You don't need to confront. You don't need to accuse. You don't need to test with manipulation. You simply observe patterns over time. Healthy attraction grows with presence, trust, and mutual effort. Transactional attraction grows with benefit and comfort. Female psychology doesn't demonize either. It just asks you to be honest about what you're participating in, because the most expensive mistake a man makes is investing deeply where value isn't mutual. Money can support a relationship, but it cannot be the relationship. When you stop confusing provision with connection, your standards become visible, and the right people rise to meet them.